So we're going to go ahead and start working on rigging our quadruped. So to begin with, we're going to build out a spine rig that we're going to then implement into another scene that we'll be using for our quadruped. We're building it out into a separate scene because we're going to build it as its own autonomous object that we can then bring in and use in several different parts should we need to. So we're going to go ahead and focus on creating a ribbon rig, which is going to be a little bit different than the Spline IK, but it's going to offer a lot more in terms of functionality and setup, and it's going to really allow for quite a bit of deformation. But it does take a bit of work to set up, so we'll go ahead and get started with that. So to begin with, what we're going to do is we're going to go up to our Create menu, we're going to go to NURBS Primitives, and we're going to create a plane. So we're going to use a NURBS plane for this instead of a polygon plane when we go through and we create this, and you'll see why before too long. So for the NURBS plane, we're going to come over to the Inputs tab and we're going to change a couple of settings here. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make the width 2 instead of 1. And we're going to go ahead and take the length ratio and make that 5. This is basically what makes the size of our actual object in geometry here. And the next thing that we need to do is take a look at this section for patches U and V, which basically, if I turn off the wireframe, this is going to give us the equivalent, or the NURBS equivalent, of edges, which for NURBS are called isoparms. So what we want to do is take our V patches and change them from 1 to 5. So now that we've got our setup in here, we're going to go ahead and give it a name. So we'll call this, let's call this C underscore, we can actually just call it ribbon geo, so ribbon underscore geo. So that'll be our name. I'll keep the outliner open as well too, so that way we can see everything that we're going to be creating. So immediately we're going to go ahead and we're going to group this to itself, and we'll go ahead and call this our ribbon underscore geo underscore 0 for offset node, similar to what we've been doing prior to this. So now that we've got this in place, what we're going to do is we're going to create a control object that we're going to basically establish as a global move control object for this. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back over to my AI rigging shelf here. And you can create something, whatever you need. I'm going to just go ahead and use a square here. We'll keep it really simple for right now. I'm going to go ahead and hit F8 to go into component mode, select all the CVs, and we'll rotate this 90 degrees. And so the idea primarily is that we want something that we, the animator, will be able to see and work with. So I'll just create something that will be perhaps along these lines here. Let's take and snap these to the grid here. So we'll just go ahead and snap those over and snap those over. Normally we could do a circle, but in this regard I want something that's just going to be really really easy for the animator to be able to see, and then select to be able to move. And actually the animator really won't be using this. This is going to be more for us to use. So we want to keep it something that's a little discrete in some regards. So I'm going to go ahead and call this, we'll call this our ribbon underscore global move. And because it's sort of a centralized object, I'm going to go into the attribute editor, shape node, we'll go to object display, drawing overrides, and we will make this yellow. So that way we've just got something that's kind of easy to see and know exactly what we'll be working with here. So now that we have this set up, we'll just go ahead and take our ribbon geo offset node, parent it underneath the global move, so that way if we move it around, we can see that everything moves, it rotates and scales appropriately at the moment. And that's the end result of what we're going to be looking for here, is that we want the main global move that we have here to be able to move, scale up, and allow us to position it wherever we need to position it when we go through and we do this. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create, just go ahead and create a group node here, and we're going to call this our ribbon underscore system underscore 0. We're going to use that node momentarily, but for right now we're just going to keep it there. So what we're going to do now, the power of using the ribbon rig is going to involve us using a hair system for dynamic purposes. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the ribbon geometry, and in order to get to our hair system, we're going to need to go from our modeling drop down tab to our effects drop down tab. And so what we're looking for is going to be right over here, which is going to be N hair. We're going to come over and create N hair. We'll click on the options box. So what we are looking for realistically is we'll go just to the edit menu and we'll just reset the settings so that way everything is at its default. The only things that we need to adjust are right over here. We need to change the U and V counts. So the U count will be 1, the V count will be 5. We'll go ahead and click on create. So what this does is this gives us a Paint Effects series of hair along with a series of other components that quite honestly we really don't need. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to delete everything that we have here except for this component right over here, which is the system follicles or hair system 1 follicles. So we don't need the Paint Effects hair. That's the actual representation of the actual hair. So we're going to go ahead and delete that. We're also going to take this hair system 1 and we're going to delete that, and we can also delete this nucleus node, which is sort of the physics driving engine that we have here for the system. So what we have here are these little red that look like circles with a line coming out of them. These are the follicles. And so what's really nice about this is that follicles, when you create them on a piece of geometry, whether it's NURBS or polygons, they actually will stay attached to the geometry no matter how it deforms, which is, you know, the benefit of this. So if we were to go ahead and simply right click and go into CV mode, and if I were to grab a series of CVs and move them up, you'll see that the follicles will actually not only stick to the surface, but they will move and sort of, you know, follow the surface's normal of the geometry that it's being attached to that while it's deforming. This is the power of follicles, and so we're going to use that to our advantage. So we're creating a hair system only to get rid of all of those components. So what we're going to do though is we're going to take a look at how this hair system is set up here. So at the moment we have a group node which is called hair system 1 follicles, and then underneath we have each one of these individual follicles. We also happen to have these empty group nodes in here. We don't need these. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take these and we're going to delete them so that way they're removed from the system. So the ribbon name is based off of the geometry that we created. So you'll see here that we have this piece of geometry called ribbon_geo, which is what gives you the name here for that. So what we're going to do is just change the naming here of these. So I'm going to come over here and just change the name of these, and we'll just sort of change this to geo_01_FOL for follicle. So that way I can just copy this name or copy that component. We'll just paste that and then change this to 2, change this one to 3, 4, and then finally 5. And then we can also just call this ribbon_geo_ FOL_0, so that way we get our offset node. So now that we have those, we've deleted everything, we've renamed our follicles as well as our ribbon setup here. We're going to go ahead and create some joints. So I'm going to go ahead and simply create 5 joints, right? Because we're going to have one for each of these sections here. So that's going to be the spine setup. We are going to have 5 joints, very similar to what we've had prior. So we'll go ahead and we'll just type in the word joint, and that's going to give us this. It's going to keep everything sort of oriented. So the thing that we have to be mindful of here is the way that this has sort of been created at the moment. Okay. So for the time being, what I am going to do, you can see that because I had that geo selected when I created it, it put it inside of there. So what we're going to do is we'll duplicate this joint 5 times. And we'll take each one of these and we're going to parent them underneath their respective follicle. So with those selected, we'll select each of these joints here. And we'll go ahead and we'll zero out their translates. So that way they basically now are in their exact same locations that we would expect them to be. So we've zeroed out their transforms. And in this case, that's going to be absolutely fine. Now, the problem that we will run into, at least at the moment, is that we don't have these joints oriented. At the moment, they are oriented to the world, which could theoretically pose a bit of a problem for us. So the way that we're going to take a look at this is we need to take a look at this world axis here, because that world axis is really going to tell us everything that we need to know here for these joints. So what I'm going to do is with each of these, I want to just go ahead and just imagine for a moment, right, if we're looking at the z-axis and the x-axis, and x pointing out to the side, we'll imagine that our character would be facing in this appropriate direction. So we need to go ahead and, at least for the time being, orient these joints so that way X is at least pointing down a proverbial chain, right? So if I were to go ahead and select this joint and then go into a front view, or actually if we were to take a look at it in a top view, this would be sort of the direction that the character would be facing in. So that tells me which direction we need to rotate these joints in, which means I need to do a 90-degree rotation for the orientation in Y. So we're going to go ahead and open up our Comet tools. Actually, we don't even need to do that because I've still got it centered over here. So I'll select each one of these. We'll turn on the show axes. And with each of these, we can just go ahead and do a 90-degree rotation for Y. So if we go ahead and we take a look at that, we've now got them all pointing down the line. And if we switch over to object mode, we can see that each one of these is X is pointing down the chain, and then Z will be pointing out in this direction, which I think in this case will be fine for right now. So we've got that all going in the appropriate direction. So that'll be perfect. So we'll go ahead and we'll select each of these joints, and we will simply just turn off the hide axis component here. So we can, of course, go ahead and rename our joints. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So we'll just go to our search and replace names. We'll tell it to look for joint in this case, and we'll tell it to replace it with C_ribbon_0, and then that'll give us our naming convention that we have going on here, and then we just need to add in the _JNT at the very end. Go ahead and copy that, and just simply paste that into the rest of the names. So that way we've got a appropriate naming convention going on here. So looking at this, this should be fine. So we've got 5, 4, 3, 2, and then 1 being that last joint. So if we take a look at it from the top view, this is technically going in a different order. So what we may do is just rechange the naming, because if we imagine that this is the front end of our character's back, right? This is closer to the upper back, and this is closer to the hips. We'd want this to probably be the 1 joint here. So what I may do is just change these over to 1, and these can be 2. This can still stay as 3, 4, and then finally 5, right? Since that's the direction that we want these to be pointing down towards. So I think that'll work.